All right, well, I think we are going to get started. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you for taking a break from our cocktails and food and conversation. It's a lot of fun to be doing things like this once again. We've been out to a lot of these over the past 3-6 months, but this is the first official North Coast event that we've had since February 25th of 2020. So it's really cool to have people in a room and start to get these things going again. And we're optimistic we're going to get to do a lot more of them. We've got a bunch more scheduled actually this summer and fall, so we hope we'll see people for more of that. But we'll just say thank you and welcome for joining us here. This is the first of our North Coast Ventures 2022 Investor Insight Series. This year, the whole series is sponsored by Alliance Staffing and TalentLaunch. So I'll just take one moment and say thank you to Aaron, to team, and to Alliance and TalentLaunch. We're excited to have them as partners, and we're excited to be here. Normally at this moment, I would say a little bit about the organization, considering I'm sitting next to the person who actually knows a lot. When we go down the room and I just ask everyone to tell us a little bit about themselves, I'll have Aaron do a much better commercial than I would do. But we appreciate it again, and we're going to try to do a lot more of this here over the coming months here. With that, I think let's just start the conversation. We'll ask Aaron, and we'll go down the group just to remind everybody who we are, what we're doing, and background, and then we'll dive into some questions and conversation.
Awesome. Well, welcome everyone, and so glad to have you here, and I'm glad that everybody's in person and having a chance to network. I know that we were going to start a little bit earlier, but everybody wanted to talk to each other, which is awesome. So it's just awesome that we're all back together. We're communal people, and connection matters. So glad to be here. So my name is Aaron Grossman. I'm the co-founder of the Alliance group of companies that represent the Ohio market and the Cleveland market in particular. And also the CEO of a company called TalentLaunch, which is a nationwide network of independently operated staffing and recruitment companies. And really at the central point of what we do is to serve a purpose of motivating the world to realize its potential. And behind me is our what we call our redwood tree, which really is the culture, the essence of our culture, the values that we leverage to feed our redwood tree so we can grow redwoods throughout the world. And hopefully in return of that, we are helping people realize their potential and give them their opportunities to find their best selves. And that's what we do every day. In the world of what we do, we match talent with opportunity. So we work with companies and help them identify and find talent that are best fits for them. And when we are able to make those types of matches, things happen. Wonderful things happen. And I think all of you know who are entrepreneurs out here. When you've hired that right person for your business, what happens? That's what we try to do every day. So we are a nationwide network of independently operated staffing and recruitment companies. We have nine operating companies throughout the United States now. All have their own brand identity. That's one of our value propositions to the founders that we acquire staffing companies from, is that we maintain their brand identity, but we've created a tech-enabled shared services platform that we basically, what I'll say is rip out their antiquated engine and insert our tech-enabled shared services platform into their businesses and allow them to run and grow past the limits that typically have guided them over the last several years of their business. As a side note in the discussion today, we do innovation as a big part of who we are, and one of the things that we created out of our business several years ago was a company that ended up becoming called Able. It's just a really cool story that we'll be talking about today. But it really kind of stemmed out of a core issue that we had been dealing with that ultimately we realized that every staffing company in America dealt with, and that was proven out with the story of Able. So that's really a little bit about us. So thank you for coming today.
Hi, my name is Gerald. Up until exactly 6 months and 2 days ago, I was the CEO of Able, what was originally EmployStream. Thanks to Aaron giving my first office there, which was in his IT closet at his old office, which was great. But hey, thanks Todd and Daniel and North Coast for having us and turning events back on. Hopefully this will be a lot of fun. Thanks Aaron for sponsoring, and I'm looking forward to telling a little bit about the story.
So I'm Daniel Luketic. I'm the director of North Coast Ventures. And so with a fund and team our size, that means I do a little bit of everything. I'm involved in our diligence processes. I'm involved in supporting our portfolio companies, sitting in board observer and director seats, try to offer some of that perspective on the panel as far as Able and their growth is concerned today. And prior to that, I've spent my whole early career working in early stage software companies, helping a number of them launch from MVP through those early pre-seed stages.
Terrific. Well, tonight we have some of our investors, some of our CEOs, some of our partners in the room, a lot of people who know a lot about startups. And as you know, not all these startups work, right? We go into these things assuming that at least half the companies will fail. One of the reasons we're so optimistic about how much fun this can be and how much value we can create is because when a company fails, the worst you can do is fail. The worst you can do is lose all your money. And the successful outcomes, you can actually make your money many times over. You can build companies of substance. You can really innovate and accomplish big, interesting, hard things. And one of the things we want to do more of is to acknowledge when that works, why it works, and celebrate that. So we're here tonight to tell, in large part, the story of Able, which of course starts with Aaron. And Aaron living and breathing the staffing world, growing a company over time, saw an opportunity to solve a problem not just within his own organization, but eventually to take that opportunity, spin it out, and to create a standalone company. And with that, the risk and the joy and the opportunity that comes from building companies. So I wonder if you might just take us back to the very beginning, how you thought about this as an opportunity both internally for your organization and then externally as something you might want to create a business around.
Definitely. Well, I think, from a mindset perspective as an entrepreneur, like I never knew I was going to be an entrepreneur. It wasn't something that I had a passion for, saying, when I graduate college or my life story is going to be about owning something or being an entrepreneur. That wasn't it for me. But when I realized now that I was probably always destined to be an entrepreneur, mainly because I just choose and want to think differently about everything. And I want to think about, it's fun. It's more of a game when you can think about how do you do something different and better in the things that you want to accomplish in life. And that's just been my story. So when I got into the staffing industry, I realized very quickly that it was a very antiquated industry. Not a lot of professional operations that existed. It's a people business, and it's a relationship business, and we are really good at those types of things in our industry, but we don't spend a lot of time thinking about how do we really optimize the things that we do so that we can actually deliver a service or a product, which is a human, in a way that actually delivers to the expectation of our customer. And so when you look at the net promoter score in our industry, it's pretty awful. It's abysmal. And that's a direct correlation to what I was just talking about earlier. And so I was always thinking about how do we do this better? How do we create a better experience? And whether that was doing video interviewing or the essence of really what Able was something that I started to do probably 6 years prior to it being born, was just trying to create a better experience for our candidates. So to give you a sense, and I don't want to bore you too much, what had to happen way back when is a candidate who was unemployed would have to come to a physical office. Again, they're unemployed. A lot of these people are low-wage earners as well. And they would have to fill out paperwork that typically took about an hour to 2 hours to complete. And most of it was redundant information you had to do over and over again. And then by the time you were done, then maybe you'd get an interview. And most of the time you didn't have a job to walk away from. You have to wait for that. And so it was a really bad experience. And I just kept thinking about that's a way in which we can differentiate. If we can create a better experience for our talent and get more talent into our system, then we're going to be better positioned to serve our customers because we'll have the volume. We'll have the talent. And so that was the essence of where of what Able started from. That was one component of it. The other was the bad part of it. That ultimately kickstarted this was that we were working with a company here in Cleveland. Actually, I've told the CEO this. The company's Odie. It was a big customer of ours, and what happened at that time was we had a new recruiter, had been with us for a couple of months. We trained them, but we had no checks and balances on making sure they did the things they were supposed to do. And one of the things that he did, he placed a candidate at Odie who they loved. They wanted to hire permanently. And when they actually went to hire that person on permanently, they did a background check, and he had a felony. And at that moment in time in that history of where we were at, they couldn't hire that person based on their policy. I think probably if things have changed now, but they were very upset at us because we weren't forthright about it. And then when we did our diligence and looked back at it, we had to own that because he forgot to do the background check. And we didn't have those checks and balances in place to make sure that would happen each and every time. So it was hard to lose a customer. We lost we lost Odie at that time. But that was really an opportunity for us, because how do we figure out how to fail forward and never have that happen again? And that was really the beginning of what EmployeeStream was the original name. It became Able. But it was really about how do we create an onboarding tool for our talent that not only gives them a better experience so they can do it at home versus having to come into an office, but also just the way they had to handle paperwork. They can enter their information once and it would populate into the appropriate places into multiple other sections that they had to complete, so it would just save them time. Just make it easier for them. But also, it also helped manage the compliance side so that each and every time we knew that background checks were being done, drug screens were needed to be done if they needed to be, and if specific customers that we had specific paperwork that needed to be filled out, we can make sure that that was done too. And we can do that at scale by creating a technology around that. So when we created the solution initially for us, I'll never forget it. Like that first week, there were, I think it was like 4 or 5 people that were thinking something was broken because they're like, they didn't, all the things that they were responsible for having to do were no longer, it was like not flowing through their desk. And they didn't know what to do. They thought something was broken. It wasn't broken. It was actually like fixed in a major way. And so what that allowed us to do is to repurpose those people into opportunities that could drive revenue versus manage compliance. And that's when I said to myself, I'm like, I think we've got something here. I think this is not a problem that we just have. My industry has this problem. And I think we should leverage this and solve for it. And so we spent a couple of years internally designing it as a product that we can sell. And what I remember telling our CIO at the time, who was the co-founder of EmployeeStream, I said, we have to get 5 staffing companies who aren't us to buy this thing. And then if that happens, we're going to go out and find partners who can help us fund this thing to grow it. And that was really the start of EmployeeStream Able.
Terrific. That's a great starting point. So, Gerald, you've been in leadership roles at high growth technology companies prior. You came into this opportunity probably with both some healthy interest and skepticism, right, as we all have. How did this story and opportunity look to you at day one as you just took it in initially?
Well, I mean, Aaron and I knew each other socially, and at first it was I took the conversation out of courtesy. A friend in the audience, Chris, introduced us as I was leaving business. He and I had and some others had started together, and I met him. You were getting off a plane and for coming from China, and we met at a Starbucks in Solon. I took the meeting out of courtesy because it was the right thing to do, and drove home, frankly, disinterested because it was in the staffing industry. My views of having used staffing organizations as vendors before weren't that great. So at first I wasn't that excited, but we had some subsequent conversations. And basically, as I was leaving a job I had been at for 10 years at a company that I had helped build and almost got drunk and tattooed on me one time in Vegas. So close. I was trying to do some reflection. It's probably still gonna have it. I was trying to do some reflection, like what am I good at? And I realized, well, I'm pretty good at solving problems, like find problems, lean into the problems when no one else wants to, and try to find solutions, whether it be with technology or with people or whatnot. And so one of the things that struck me in my subsequent conversations with Aaron is all the things he just told you about the reasons they started building technology to solve. Is the thing in the staffing industry is the scale of that problem is so insane. Because it's not just the one candidate they missed at Odie, it's the fact that some staffing firms hire hundreds of thousands of candidates a year. And in the U.S. alone, a large double-digit percentage of our workforce goes through staffing agencies. And that was something I didn't know. And I frankly kind of fell in love with the problem. I was like, wow, this is a real thing. And I started doing some searching. I'm like, there's not really a lot of people doing this. Through a lot of Q&A with Aaron that he probably found annoying, I discovered that, or I didn't discover, I'm not an adventurer, but I realized that staffing is completely boxed in. It's this niche market that HR people hate and staffing people hate HR people. And so like if you were a technology provider there, you really had to be born there or you had to stumble in there. I'm like, wow, our unfair advantage, because if he's gonna build a company that's successful and I'm gonna help, we have to have an unfair advantage because we have to get lucky. And our unfair advantage is that we can be incubated inside of a staffing agency. So those two things kind of hit. I'm like, it's a huge problem. No one else is solving it, and it's already being solved from the people who know the space. Like, maybe this is something I should look at. So I actually drove to Fort Wayne, Indiana, and I sat in the office of a staffing agency there that was on the radar of them, and I kind of hid there and pretended like I was a potential candidate. And I just watched all these people come in, stumble around with paperwork, and leave. They come in, stumble around with paperwork, and leave. And I think I called and said, "Hey, I'm in." And what does that mean? So for me, it was just the desire to go find problems, a big problem that I could go try to lean into, solve, and then try to have some early elements of product market fit that I thought were repeatable, that we could go build something special around.
That is deep undercover. I don't think I've heard that part of the story before. I like it. So Daniel, you, in your time at North Coast, have probably seen many hundreds, if not thousands, of companies. What stood out about this or didn't stand out about the Able story when you first saw it and kind of contemplated whether or not it was a fit for us?
Yeah, so I joined North Coast in 2016 as we were launching our third seed fund, so our third early stage fund, and which Able Employee Stream was a part of that fund. And soon after I had joined, we had entered into some conversations about how thesis might get tweaked, modified, evolve a little bit. And so we found ourselves wanting to double down more on enterprise SaaS. Our history up until that point, it had been mixed portfolios of everything from medical device to hardware and controls and advanced materials and kind of across the board. So we had just started to focus more on the sweet spot. So I think what stood out to Employee Stream, if I rewind the clock, is it felt like a just really nice core bread and butter kind of company to put into a portfolio that we were designing. Some of the elements, some of this has been mentioned, but just super unsexy enterprise SaaS, right? It doesn't have to.
I know to dress that nice that first meeting.
But from our standpoint, the more complex and difficult and kind of gritty and workflow and process and all that mess, right, is what we were after and what we felt like was good kind of Ohio, Cleveland kind of deals that we were looking for. And so, here was a company that we saw from that initial traction that had been generated, and just from Aaron being able to talk very clearly, right, about the problem. You've got deep industry expertise. Gerald being brought into the fold brought clear back a startup early stage expertise to the table and was a key element. There was a competent CTO around the table, so from a team perspective, it felt like it had all of those kind of just core elements that we'd want. I think from our perspective, it was really important that they were demonstrating not just a clear ROI as far as savings and efficiencies, in a market where you've already heard a bit of the characterization of just like how broken and inefficient and cumbersome, right, the status quo was, but that they had that play into top line value prop as well. I think that was, a key element to us. And then, who knew that this company's story would wrap up the way it did, but to already have a partnership in the works and conversations happening with this organization, Bullhorn, was attractive, right, to us to know in this environment that they had already achieved that and put it on their traction list. So I think those were some of the elements that maybe stand out.
Great. And Aaron, you said earlier that you would know this was potentially ready to become a real standalone company if 5 of your competitors, 5 other players in the market said yes. So they said yes. And so when when Gerald came forward, it sounds like Gerald, if I can summarize, you were most interested with your reconnaissance mission in validating that this was a real problem? That was when you did your own diligence as to what was the opportunity. You want to know, is this a real problem they're solving?
Well, I mean, right. So Aaron's a persuasive person, and the bulk of the revenue and delivery around the initial product and the one-person team was this organization that is here, all of the companies that make up the TalentLaunch network. And so what I wanted to make sure was it wasn't just some of Aaron's buddies in the space, no offense, but like that had said yes, and we did, and there was a pipeline of 5 or 6 folks that said yes, and there was 2 or 3 others that were paying. But I wanted to make sure, like, can I go validate this? It's almost like my own diligence, right? I spent about 26 days trying to do a round of diligence to figure out, can I validate that I'm going to go pour an incredible amount of time and energy into this. I'm going to go recruit some people that I love to death to be part of this with me, and I'm going to go ask a bunch of capital providers like yourselves to give money, and like I wanted to make sure that I like did my own a little bit of diligence on the whole experience to make sure that was real. Not that I disbelieved what was already there, but I had to go make sure I was part of this. I wanted to make sure the story was genuine and organic to me, and not just like a third-party situation.
Yeah. And then Daniel, to what extent does that articulation of diligence feel like what North Coast wanted to do and prove versus, hey, we had a different process of what we wanted to see and understand?
So I think that the elements that we saw had us feeling like the main risk categories weren't necessarily around can they build this, right? Is there invention risk? Is there a lot of that, right? We could clearly see a path that they could build a team, continue to build this out, and what was needed there. Operationally, again, we liked, especially with Gerald joining and kind of being tasked with building team, his background and ability from an operational risk standpoint to kind of go out and execute, sell. We saw Gerald as being a kind of sales first mentality, which was really important to us. So operationally, didn't see as much risk in their ability to sell and scale. I think most of our conversation from a diligence perspective, quite frankly, was around market and market size, right? So we had a really large diligence team on this one, which I guess just going back to team as well was nice to be able to very quickly validate Cleveland being a small town, right? I think we had 9 people on the diligence team, and I'm sure they were all probably connected to Aaron and or Gerald in some way. So, right, we were able to get really quick perspective, I feel like, between that and other membership. So, but back to market, I mean, a lot of the conversation was sizing, staffing, and if you just stay there, it was a little bit constraining, right? And there's some risks coming with that small market size, not just potential, kind of exit value and exit number, but there are some risks that come with that of, if other players, big players decide to come in, right? The market's a little bit more sensitive to that. Pricing pressures, I think, some other sensitivities just around there's, only kind of so many key partnerships, and so a reliance on those key partnerships as well. So I think a lot of our discussion focused there, and then it's way too early to call how you move into other verticals or how you find bigger markets that you can expand into, but just generally testing the strategic thought process, right, as to how those moves might eventually look and when they might come up in this company's trajectory. Those were big parts of our diligence.
Okay. So, Aaron, you had the idea, you got the CEO, you had capital come in from North Coast, from Jumpstart, later from Rev1 and Plymouth. This was really easy, right? It was super successful, up and to the right, no problem. Any speed bumps to note or challenges along the way?
Not actually. When it comes to funding, I do feel very fortunate. But honestly, like when I think about a lot of my entrepreneurial journey, like I call it luck. But when I really think about it, it's like I do the work to put myself in a position where luck happens. Whether it's finding Gerald, for example, Chris Snyder, who Gerald talked about, is a close friend of mine, and I've been a part of. I believe in to always be in the pursuit to grow both personally and professionally. I want to learn. So there was organizations out there that I could join and participate with other entrepreneurs. Chris was running a company at the time, and we joined a peer group together, and we became really close. And really, I look at Chris and I's relationship as we kind of grew up in business together and have had a shared entrepreneurial journey. And when Gerald was kind of ready to, Gerald had told Chris that he wanted to become he wanted to start his own thing. He wanted to venture off and do something different. Chris, took me, had a drink with me one day and mentioned this to me, and it kind of made that introduction. So luck. I got somebody like Gerald to come and be a part of this. Now I had to obviously entice him and validate. But there's luck to that. But I put myself in a position to have that. And then just by happenstance, when we started to think about creating Able out of my business, the idea was to connect ourselves to potential partners in the industry. So my core business, we've got a big vision. We're trying to become a $1 billion company in the next 5 years, and it requires, and a lot of that's through acquisition. So we need a lot of our own capital to do that. I knew right there and then that I didn't have the ability to fund this opportunity, and I can see where it could go, and also fund the vision that I've had initially when I started my company in 2001. And so so we started to create relationships early on. And our first relationship, quite honestly, was with Jumpstart. I think Hetrick's here, but they have a mentorship program at that time, and just started getting involved with that. Like, what do we need to do to get financial partners into this? Because I had never done this before, and so that was a huge help. Going back to Chris, I mean, being in this peer group that we had, I got a chance to interact with people who had started technology companies, SaaS-based companies, and learned very early on that it's very different than a traditional business, right? It's about growing revenue. It's not necessarily about, especially in the startup mode, it's not about directly driving net income. It's driving revenue and building towards that next level until you get to that level, whether it's growing 40% year-over-year top-line growth at a minimum, whether it's creating minimum of 60% gross profit or gross margin percentages. These are things at the time that were taught to me to, like, I have to create if I'm going to create a technology business, it's got to be that. So I wanted to learn all these things, but in the process got a chance to re-engage with you and other people in the community like Jumpstart, and so by the time we had those 5 companies, I felt we had a real business case to showcase. So not only do we have customers, but we have real professional leadership to help guide this company in the future that actually lived in the technology space in that regard. So it wasn't that to your point, Gerald, it wasn't that it was hard. It was just like that was the work that I thought you had to do to get to where we needed to go, and it just everything lined up. So I feel very fortunate that in this particular story, we just did all the right things. All the right things happened. I mean, the biggest thing that has to happen is that vision real? Like, did you build something that people want to buy and that people need? And once that was the big if. But once we started to show that kind of traction, and partners like North Coast got involved with us and brought additional leadership to help advise us, we were off the races. Like Gerald and I, when we sat down for coffee, I said to him kind of what was going to happen. I said, this thing's going to sell in 5 years. It's going to sell for X amount of money. It actually sold for a little bit more than that X amount of money, but it was like literally exactly what we had talked about. So everything happened as it was meant to happen.
Just that easy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I'm guessing was not on the roadmap, though, was probably global pandemic, right? So give us just some sense of, to the staffing industry, what the impact was, because those are your customers, right? Those are the people you need to buy and engage. And then for Able, what was the impact of COVID at that point, probably 2.5 years after launch?
Well, I mean,
I'll just say one thing about that moment, because there's a backstory in how I saw the world going, moving towards. So our company, and a lot of the design of our company was thinking about how technology was going to change the future. And I actually believed in remote work starting in 2012 and started to build technology and our infrastructure to support that, primarily because Cleveland is not necessarily the most attractive place to bring talent in. And I'm in as Gerald mentioned, a niche industry. It's a $150 billion a year industry, but It's, if I want to become a $1 billion company and I got to hire that kind of talent, am I really going to get them to move to Cleveland, or can I build technology that would allow me to hire people wherever they might want to reside? And so I already had that in mind. And at the same time, I thought about the talent. As I mentioned earlier, the experience of a talent, having to come into an office to apply is just cumbersome, especially when you're not guaranteed a job. So what if we can make that experience at the comfort of their home? So you fast forward to COVID, where suddenly everybody had to be remote. And there was this platform called Able that existed that was basically a remote onboarding platform to basically it already solve the problem that immediately existed with so many companies in our industry and throughout the world. That's really how I look at that.
So the top side opportunity was huge, but I mean, you have to be incredibly nimble and have the engineering and go-to-market talent to be able to execute that quick. We were a business of 35 people or so at that time, and so we didn't, and maybe that's my mistake, but in some cases couldn't move as fast as we maybe should have to capture the moment. But we built the culture of Able from a leadership perspective was to be very pragmatic, and so I learned in 2008 when our bank line got called, out of the blue, and and the world was falling apart the tech world was falling apart, that you always had to have a contingency plan in place, and so we operated Able with 3 plans. Our dream, what's our big vision, what's the executable, all things being equal, what we know about now, and then what's our contingency plan. And so when 2008 hit, or when COVID hit, John Carpenter's in the room, he was part of my leadership team. We spent many a night texting back and forth about the what ifs that could happen the next day and what levers that we already knew we had to pull. And so we had this great opportunity where we could capture some things on the top side, but we needed to execute a business. We were also very, very, very fortunate. Able was a business that raised a lot of venture capital, I don't know, 12 million or so, and a couple other million, some more money in debt. And we started early on our Series B raise. We call it Series B, really a real Series A. Series B raise in the fall of 2019. And a lot of people, frankly, told me it was too early and I was being too pragmatic, and we should just, it's okay, when you get a couple months of burn, you're a great story in Cleveland, we'll fund you. Well, ultimately we closed that round, it was $7 million in January of 2020. So it ended up being an incredibly fortunate timing because no one got capital for the next 6 months after that because the world shut down and we would have run out of money. And so always having that contingency plan enabled us to continue to execute the business. We didn't lay off a single person. We didn't take any PPP money. We were able to really continue to move the business forward and then turn our most talented people towards the problem of capturing the upside opportunity. So said, okay, let's listen. We know that the downside, the staffing industry, and every economic cycle, they have big pop at the beginning, big pop at the end, and a lot of turbulence during the middle of recessions otherwise. So we knew the bottom tier of our customers were going to consolidate, go away, not be able to survive, and we needed to be prepared for some churn. Frankly, we were built in the back of some small customers. We need to be prepared for some churn, but to do that, we needed to go be a bit uncomfortable at forcing ourselves to be even more agile than we were to try to capture that top side opportunity. So we had some heroic moments. We had people like John and his team that did some absolutely heroic things to go to some large customers across country healthcare and build custom solutions for them out of the gate to solve this remote work or rapid credentialing needed to get more healthcare workers to. So that kind of helped us really, frankly, get a little bit bigger name in the space. People saw, wow, not only because in the technology space, many businesses retracted and needed to go get bridge funding, and we didn't. There's a little bit of fortunate, incredible amount of luck. We had great partners behind us. All of our capital partners, listened to my story and were super supportive and never asked me to do anything other than what we were doing, even in those hard times. And we had some people that just internally did some incredibly heroic things to go capture as much as that top side opportunity that existed, and we were able to create some leverage from that.
Daniel, maybe share, what did it look like from the investor side, where we're one of many investors? Early on, we had one of many board seats. Our director actually shifted into observer role when Plymouth came in eventually, but we were still had a seat at the table as an observer, and we're still actively involved. But what is it like to be part of kind of that cast of characters at a little bit of a white knuckle moment, not just for this company, but for half of the companies in the portfolio?
Yeah, so I'll rewind a little bit to like how we first engaged, because that sets the stage for like then how we respond in a moment like that. I mean, how we first engaged was traditionally we try to just make sure we can play a role in helping make sure that there is enough capital, right? That's the reason the companies die, is they run out of money, and we can play a role in helping them and being supportive just because we have so many investors that we've invested with alongside over the years and make connections. I think one of the first things we did when we, after we committed to investing, was making an introduction to OTAF Rev 1, and they ended up joining, and they're on the cap table and a good investor to have. One of the other big early decisions that we always make is, do one of us end up sitting on that board, or do we identify a member that's going to be a good fit? And in this case, Alan Brenner had served on the diligence team, had developed a little bit of rapport, and I think with Gerald back and forth, and there was a good fit. And he's one of our most used and go-to kind of board directors, and so he was a great one to link up and help Able. Our board director does a lot of the heavy lifting on our behalf. We kind of sit back and we're this support team, this management company, right, that can consume the information coming in, largely funnel our support through him, whether that's door opening, helping around sticky issues, or in the case of COVID, right, the triage scenario of us sitting back and saying, what are we seeing and how can we funnel that to the right companies that have a different set of issues depending on where they're at in their company and their company stage. So in that moment, it's a little bit of that of back and forth with Gerald as our board director and offering support. What I will say is, Gerald is a nice case study example that, quite frankly, we've used throughout the portfolio in how to establish a terrific line of communication and material sharing, right, with investors and board, right? So the regular investor reporting that you put out, right, has all the metrics you'd be after and just enough narrative that you'd be after. It's all substantial, and it all tells a story from report to report that's easy to understand the state of the business, which makes it easier to help the business. Is the right level of candid and open and honest, and also sharing what the next carrot is that you're after and pursuing. So that's really valuable to consume. Considering we had a board director and we're also consuming the board reports and able to put our heads together with Alan Brenner on those as well, just really solid reporting that, again, if Alan was here, he would absolutely second. I think one of the things that Gerald did really well, for those moments, those hard times like COVID, or even in the regular times, was there's this consistency and focus and stability that Alan continuously would say. I don't have to wonder. Some CEOs, you walk in board meeting to board meeting, and it's a whole different set of issues and direction that the company's going, right? With Gerald, I knew we were going to come in and we're going to be talking about, a similar set of issues because we've got our eye on the ball. And maybe it's that little coffee or drink that you guys had when you said we're going to sell in 5 years for this amount. You could tell that Gerald knew what was going to happen in the future and was executing against that very specific plan.
So thank you for teeing up the exit. Let's fast forward a little bit here. So I lack Aaron's premonition. So I'm always thinking about who's going to be interested in this opportunity, when and why, and what if they're not, and for whom are we creating value for. In this case, I think it probably made a lot of sense because Bullhorn is the big player in this industry. They're a partner, they know you, they are integrated with the product already, but there were other choices. There's a whole host of active private equity groups rolling companies up, right, which was a viable opportunity. And also there was also the ability to say to your other investors who are like you and like the story and are willing to write a check. So what told you that was the right time to exit?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, it's been 6 months and I want my business back, but no, we had lots, so I loved the notion. Long time ago, we had a consultant in another business company I was at and talked about the difference between, reporting on past results and leading indicators. And so like I told myself that I try to make as many decisions as possible going forward using leading indicators. And so I think you guys all know, other than the very first pitch slides I showed to Hetrick and Todd around that Bullhorn would buy us, which ended up being incredibly true, that I refused to define what an exit would be. Like that we were going to continue to build something special. We're going to do it in a way that was trying to make a bunch of right decisions, and the opportunity would show up. That said, we knew that we had a market issue. The staffing market, while being $150 billion, the reality is it's highly fragmented, or it's very clearly defined between some large companies and a bunch of really small companies. And so I needed so many businesses to buy and consume and continue to renew my software that we needed to have a go-to-market engine that required a lot more capital. If we were going to pivot into other industries, we were pivoting into places that had incredible amount of competition, that our idea wasn't unique and frankly wasn't likely on the top tier of offerings. And we didn't really have the team that had the capacity to go do those things. So it needed a lot of capital. And some of it was timing. So the leading technology provider globally in staffing is Bullhorn. We watched Bullhorn buy 2 other onboarding technologies over the 5 years we were in business. We watched them go head to head and compete. I flew to Boston on numerous occasions and sat in their office and thought our partnership was ending. And we were just kind of watching that happen. And frankly, 8-9 months before the exit, I would have told you that we were going to be Bullhorn's biggest competitor, and it was time to just cut the cord and go head to head. But we kept all of our opportunities out on those, looking at those leading indicators. And somewhere around this last summer, we started to notice that Bullhorn and most of their other competitors were starting to talk much more about candidate experience. They were starting to talk about a lot of they were reframing the problems that we solved as being this bigger thing. We inferred at that point, created a hypothesis that they were going to go invest a lot of internal capital around trying to solve the problem we were, and assumed that we would be a feature and we wouldn't be able to start. So I did 21 pitches. I went to the West Coast. I did 21 pitches to non-local, non-regional VCs, big funds, $500 million funds and bigger, and pitched the notion of a massive expansion into other markets. And consumed all of that feedback. I got to understand a lot of other capital providers' thesis, understand how they felt about our notion to deliver it, how much capital we required. Took that data, which continued to give me more and more realization that it was going to be a very hard, expensive pivot. Took the data we were getting from the providers in the space to say that this problem is becoming something they believe they should solve. Went and listened to our customers about how we were servicing them and servicing them, and like what they were seeing, the requirements from us. And we just we decided that there was enough noise that we should start listening to some of these conversations. Because all of these big tech companies have corp dev teams, and they all had me on the radar, and I was getting a call every quarter. I was seeing them at the trade shows. So eventually I just decided, I think I called Aaron, the board, and said, I'm going to start taking some of these meetings. Alan Brenner was actually a great coach through this process. And so we started taking meetings, and we got effectively an LOI from a competitor of Bullhorn. It was a deal we would never take, but I brought my leadership team in and said, this is the type of thing we're looking at. We need to make a decision as a team here. Do we want to settle for this, or do we want to go fight for a bigger fight? And I let that moment be known to some folks throughout the industry to see what else would bubble up. And then when Bullhorn came, they were very, very serious. And it was a moment where they shared more about what they were doing. We realized that we were going to be fighting an uphill battle on competition. Frankly, just the capital that we required to compete at the level that they were going to do was going to be a lot. And we had a lot of. I was on the phone with Art Pappas, and had a lot of conversation about what's the right timing. Do we take a bigger risk? Do we go raise $10-12 million? And what's the possibility of that not working versus the return their shareholders could get now, which I thought was a pretty good return for the time in, the amount of money in, the risk taken. And ultimately, I presented both options to our board and our team and said, this is my recommendation, but I'll go deliver whatever you want to do. But it was a combination of trying to be really, really, really aware of all the leading indicators of what was going to happen, and trying to be super practical about the realities of our current situation. If we didn't exit in January, we would be closing a round probably 2 or 3 months ago, and it would have needed to be a pretty large round, and we would be making some big bets as a business.
Once again, not bad timing considering the market.
Just pure brilliance is what it is.
Yeah, of course. I'll add to that a little bit too. Just that there's a couple of big industry conferences, and yeah, I'm part of this, but I'm also an industry person. I own staffing companies, right? So So I'm at this one of the big industry conferences, and this is, I think, right around October. And one of the feedbacks that I kept getting from people who were, as I try to mention just Able, or just even people I'd hear talking about it around me, like talking about this company, and I could hear I can feel the momentum in that conference, that this technology mattered to the industry, that there were big staffing companies using it and talking about it to other staffing companies, and at the same time there were some of these competitors were there at that conference who were, I think, coming to the realization that we were the market leader in the industry for the work that we did.
And it was somewhat absurd, and most everyone who looked at it, that it would be a point solution feature company that solved this massive problem and not the largest providers. And so for us, our expansion plan ended up having staffing being staffing would have had to been a small slice of our overall revenue stack, because the staffing agencies were looking to the Bullhorn and their competitors to solve this problem, because it becomes such a large problem. And it was like, why do I have to go buy this software from someone else when you do everything in front of it, you do everything behind it, but not this little piece? And so it wasn't as simple as like call them, hey, are you ready to buy us now because you need us? I mean, there was a lot of work there, but ultimately it was also a frightening moment, because we needed to make the right decision there and live with the consequence.
Absolutely. Okay. So in a moment, we'll open it up just to questions from the room, but same question for all of you. We're in a business where we want to see more Ables, right? We want to see these kinds of companies ideated, created, funded, grown, and then eventually exited. What do you think we need to see happen to have more of these kinds of opportunities for the benefit of the region, right? Then, of course, our ability as investors in the region to participate.
Well, imagine let me cut you off, but imagine what incredible self-awareness it takes to have a technology idea inside of a services business and decide to go set it aside somewhere else. I mean, you're going to give up control over it. You're going to let someone else run its destiny. You're going to have a separate capital structure, and you're going to take the dilution. I mean, there's some courage there, and there's an incredible amount of self-awareness. And so, like, from my perspective, and I've had lots of people ask me the same question, and I've had people come and recently and over the past year or two say, like, hey, I had this little idea, should we incubate it and take it out? It takes like the realization that this isn't core to us. It's okay to have some side gigs, including at the executive level. It's okay to want to do some things on the side, and if you can organizationally set it up. And then it just takes more people that have worked at companies like Able that are willing to go take a risk in their own career to go try to see that through.
Yeah, for me, and I mentioned this earlier. I'm a big believer in education, and I was very fortunate being part of this peer-to-peer group to have an education on kind of startups and financially how they function and what good looks like, because it's so different than a traditional business. Like, when I talk to people even today, when I try to educate them on like what this was, they're like, what? They're burning how much a month? And you got that much? Like, what? How does that work? Because in a traditional business, it's about, for every dollar I sell, there should be there should be something that comes back down to profit. And it's a very different scenario in that early stages of a startup technology company, that if I wasn't educated on that, I would have never done what I did. But I knew, the moment that I knew I had something that I thought had the opportunity to scale in my industry, this could be something, I knew financially what it would cost, and it wouldn't be something that I could get a return on investment, 3 months from now. Like, if I start in my world now, if I start something new, I'm looking at cash flow positive in 6 months. That's not how tech startups work. That's not how it works. And so as a traditional business, I can't fund what is absolutely necessary for a company like that to truly scale. And so I was lucky. I had that education. I put myself in that position to get lucky, to have that education. And because of that, I knew that there was a way in which I could scale this outside of my business. And that helped me create that self-awareness. So, I think for the more that businesses in our community understand that, technology is a different animal. And a lot of companies like mine in other industries probably know the problems that exist in their space. And those problems exist in their competitors. This is a great opportunity to kind of leverage the startup community, the investment community, to kind of help fund those opportunities to become real, and we can solve so many more problems as a result.
Well, that's. I'm sorry to jump in, but like, we need the capital providers locally to instigate those innovative ideas and the courage to go deliver on them, right? We need. I mean, I bet there's people in this room, and there's people at all of the. I mean, a lot of the local larger blue chip companies now have some venture studios, some innovation studios internally. But like, it's a dangerous proposition, right? You could lose great talent, particularly if people internally lose. You could lose some IP. You could lose your focus. But we need to we need to instigate that level of courage and innovation desire to happen, right? I mean, like, Silicon Valley didn't happen because a bunch of new people showed up every day and created a bunch of new things. It happened because like a couple success stories like created this burgeoning overflow of people that are willing to go be innovative and put some risk at bay. And so, I mean, I don't think there's a lot unique about our story. Or atypical about our story when you think about businesses that incubate inside of another one. I just think it was that we had a couple small moments along the way where we were willing to take the risk, and we did have a level of luck, and we executed appropriately.
Yeah, it feels like step number 1, record this session, which we are doing. Step number 2, share it broadly, and everyone share with their networks, because in all seriousness, like, more people need to understand what it can result in, right? Because Todd and I, we've talked about this, right? We need 20 more Aarons to identify a really clear pain point like this, go out, build MVP. I mean, from our end of the table, we sit at the ready. This is just a super attractive formula, right? That we want to see happen time and time again. We've got our checkbook out. We want to find more of these opportunities. I think what we can bring to the table as well is, since we've got this group of over 400 investors that have invested in one or more of our funds, we're finding more and more of them come with that pedigree of a couple of either exits sitting in the founder seat under their belt, or on key operational roles, and might be capable of stepping into their first CEO role. And so we sit in a really interesting matchmaking position, I think, to kind of bring ingredients to the table, depending on that person who's saying, what I can tell you is this is a giant problem that needs to be solved, and I've solved it for myself. I'm ready to solve it for others, right? And then how do you build a business and bring a group of investors in around that? That's kind of a piece that we and other players here in just this ecosystem, Northeast Ohio, right, sit at the ready to come together and be able to fund to get something started.
Excellent. Questions from the group? Clay?
Gerald, you obviously brought a wonderful background to this situation. As you look back and think about the lessons learned in this process, were there some things that you might have done differently had you been able to do it over?
Oh,
And Gerald, I'm just going to take a moment to repeat, just in case the microphone didn't pick up, obviously, the background that you bring to this, but looking back, what might you have done differently with the insight you have today?
Yeah, we made 2 or 3 really hard decisions in the business, some painful personnel decisions. A couple of those I would have made a lot faster. I've fortunately and unfortunately had an opportunity to lead teams for 20 years of my career, and have had to make hiring and firing decisions. It's never easy. I think Chris and I have said to each other 100 times, the day it gets easy is the day you should stop doing it. But we had to make some exit decisions on people that you weren't accretive to the business. We're wonderful human beings, but weren't accretive to the business. I wish there's a couple of those I wish I would have done sooner, because we saw big inflection. Alan Brenner was just a tremendous business coach to me, and just incredible. And along the way, he would tell me, and we would talk about that. My desire to be super practical and incredibly transparent and candid has lots of great offshoots, but we needed to also make sure we were dreaming big. And so I tried to keep the business just on the north side of the comfort level and make sure everyone felt a little bit of tension and a little bit of like sales to delivery tension, and try more things and take bigger risks. Looking back, I frankly wish I would have done a bit more of that, particularly as we got acquired by a company that we thought just had everything figured out, and realized, oh wow, like they're even more out in front of their skis than we were. And so I do wish I was probably just a bit more aggressive about taking some opportunities. And then sure, there's probably there's a million little things along the way. I was talking to Dan Dugan earlier. The what if moment. When after the celebration, the what if moment at like when we were acquired and realized the value we brought to them. And it's like, oh, what if we would have waited, or what if we'd have learned, what if we'd have known this, or what if we'd have seen this? And those I can't take credit for wishing I would have done differently because I thought of those because I learned those. But yeah, I mean, there's a billion things along the way. I think the most is just like, we exited with about 50 people, John, right? There's 45 or 50 people, and I think about 42 or 43 of those were the right people on the bus. And along the way, we had some people that were great, and along the way, we had some people that probably we could have gotten more out of the roles. And I do wish there's some very specific situations that we would have made some decisions earlier, or we would have invested in some places earlier and things like that.
I have a question. It's more of a forward thinking. As you were sharing the story, I kind of heard the framework around the due diligence, the sufficient funding, the talent that's needed to do it so it's successful. And then we talked a little bit about COVID. So if we kind of move forward to where we're at now with inflation, with the discussion of recession, how does that framework look the same or start to look different if you were going through the process as we move forward?
So, I mean, I'm on the board of 2 other technology companies, and the conversations we're having now, using all the same principles but with different contexts, are dramatically different than the conversations than what we were thinking about 3 years ago in a booming technology environment where valuations were off the charts and stuff. So, I do think there's, if I understand your question, I mean, it's the decision making is key. Realizing if your decisions are wrong and then iterating those is maybe even more important. And right now, when you have this level of uncertainty, I mean, inflation and the possibility of a recession, all those things, like we've got some consumer confidence issues, we've got some corporate earnings issues, we've got some capital access issues that are all going to happen for small startups that we don't really know the timing. How long? Is it 2 quarters? Is it 4 quarters? Is it 6? Is it 3 years? So I think that businesses have to try to think about capital efficiency in a different way and make decisions, but we're willing to test those decisions along the way. The best thing, the thing I love about this region, and having spent quite a bit of time on the West Coast and in Austin and Boston pitching to non-regional capital providers, there's some incredible amount of craziness out there. The thing I love most about this region is inherently, as much as we would say we're providing big valuations, we're doing all this crazy stuff, we're still very, very, very conservative or practical and pragmatic about how we go about things. So I think there's a lot of current state, future-proof opportunities out there, but it's going to take some really agile thinking on the decision-making process. My advice to I did an interview for a CEO that I'm on the board of that's hiring a leader of sales today, and my advice to him is you got to be willing to. You personally have to be so ingrained in the results of this decision on a day-to-day basis, such that you can make great iterative follow-up decisions along the way. You can't wait to hear results too late because it's moving that fast, and capital is that important right now.
Thank you.
You mentioned the PPP money, that you didn't need it because your company was successful. Did you even try to go after it?
Yeah, we were awarded $440,000, and I pulled. Where's Sean Ganley? I pulled over on the side of the highway, and actually pulled into a Lowe's parking lot in Rocky River, and called my board members, called my key leadership folks like John, called our attorneys, and said, we're not laying anyone off. We're growing substantially. We grew 100% in 2020. I just closed a $7 million round of financing with an additional $2 million in debt capital. I am not I'm not who this money was intended for. And so while it's there and it will likely be forgiven, I just did not think we should take it. And it was it's a significant balance sheet decision, right? I mean, our leading capital provider, Plymouth, said, hey, we're going to support you all along, and we know the type of decisions you're going to make, but this is meaningful. It's not an inconsequential decision. It was at that time it was a couple months of burn for us, right? I mean, it was, and so it was a decision I made. I owned it. Told everyone I sent a board note on it. I'm making the decision, and if it's the wrong decision, I'll own that. And if it's the right decision, I'll own that as well. Yeah. It was a emotionally tumultuous day, though. I'll tell you that.
One more question to set the tone and help get us back to the bar here.
Todd,
Patrick.
You all talked about the idea of taking a talented business leader with a great idea, the wherewithal to know that has to be built somewhere else, which is over and over with SaaS companies, so true. They just can't survive inside of big companies, generally. And so you have that, and then you get to the idea of these venture studios, which I don't know of too many that are really working right. But then you transpose that on top of this area and this region with all its challenges and opportunities. How do you see that working? Like, how do we get more of him to come up with that idea and then get that out there and find a way to solve it?
Yeah, well, I enjoyed being a fly on the wall for this conversation. My wheels were turning as well. I suspect that a big part of it is awareness, right? That we could probably all close our eyes and make a list of 15 leaders who must be running companies that have the wherewithal to incubate something, the scale and the leadership to be aware of certain insights, and the ability to throw something against the wall on a really good first and second guess like Aaron did. Because what we run into all the time as investors is people with wild guesses that aren't remotely right because they don't have experience in the actual industry that they're trying to solve a problem for. And so these are smart people with lots of insights, and we'd bet on them all day in other areas, but they don't have an intimate knowledge of that. So I think one of the challenges we have, and we've got to own this, is to better identify those actual people, find a way to give them visibility into this kind of use case, and just trigger a thought process. And maybe it'll mean something happens for one of them or the next day. Maybe that'll just sit in the back of their mind for a year or two. But it's hard to believe that those opportunities out there. And maybe one of the blessings we have in Northeast Ohio is because we don't have an overblown venture ecosystem, because there are not 16 different accelerators. Yeah. A concept like that could actually get a time and attention, and that there could be a group of people who surround those individuals so that they can better understand what it takes to build and incubate a technology company. Because to your point, I don't think most people would know or have intuition around how you would do that. And with the benefit of hindsight, I'm sure there's some things Aaron's would have done differently in, say, the first year to get that proof of concept set. So I've got a lot of questions that I'm interested in. I think we can, as a group, and also working with some of the other investors and business leaders in the region, try to identify some of those companies. And I suspect some of them will look like Aaron's company, meaning they're very successful, fast-growing private companies. But what it might also do is dislodge people and ideas from some of the larger publicly traded companies in town where we don't have that issue. I've said before in these kinds of settings that we know VCs on the coast who their deal flow generation mechanism is to go to the corporate cafeterias of the Ubers of the world and just sit down and meet and talk with people who have great ideas and insights, who are itching to get out of there, right? Because they've been there for 2 years, they're bored as can be. Here in Cleveland, people are part of the corporate community in a larger, longer way, which has pros and cons. But boy, we'd love to better ensure that the people who are fundable at least know they're fundable, and know that if the time and energy is right for them to start a company, that there'll be people to surround them and help them take that next step.
I think like 30 to 40% of the venture capital delivered in 2021 went to corporate opportunities. Like so the reality is there's a difference between venture studio, like large corporate venture studio, and incubated ideas inside of an organization, right? So like I think it's like I also have lots of challenge with the success opportunities that are happening inside of venture studios, because I think there's I think it's really a financial tool for some organizations. From a strategic, like I have an idea, I have a business that does a thing, and I have an idea. Part of it I think is access to leadership. So take a company like Able. I think when we exited, I think there was 2 CEO-ready people in our organization and 2 other people that I'd personally make a vouch like you should take a shot at. We need to go aggregate those names and go encourage the other Aarons of the world that have these ideas that just don't know what to do. Like, who would I call about this? And try and create some way to pair those things up. Because if you go into Progressive's venture studio, that's going to be different. That's a wholly different experience than actually finding the next Aarons that have an idea and are willing to take a shot with someone. They need to get introduced to the next person and feel comfortable with that.
Awesome. Well, on behalf of everyone here, thank you for taking the time and energy, opening up the perspective. Aaron, thank you for sponsoring this. In addition, thank you for agreeing that everyone here can stay as late as they want and just hang out and drink and relax. And we hope people will stick around and that you'll all join us for our next event here soon. Awesome. All right, appreciate it.